guys, welcome back to the fourth episode of my discussion-based series on fixing American democracy. We are truly reimagining the U.S.'s political system for decades to come that will ultimately live up to our founding fathers' ideals of a government that's truly of the people, by the people, and for the people, that shall not perish from the earth. And in this fourth episode, I'm going to be talking about how we can reform the United States House of Representatives to overall better reflect the will of the people, or better reflect the overall population of the United States the overall population of the United States in all 50 states. And before I begin, just envision a government that's truly of, by, and for the people, where it's ultimately living up to our founders' ideals, where our founders it ensured that every member of our House of Representatives would be directly elected and regularly face the voters every 2 years. The House, said John Adams, is an exact portrait of the people. But right now, this vision is shattered today in our current politics because Congress is so dysfunctional and so divided and so gridlocked to the point where nothing's getting done anymore. And I think it results in these type of problems result only in two things. One of those things is the member size of the House of Representatives being frozen at 435 members, and the fact another main problem is redistricting, and overall that ultimately leads to gerrymandering or partisan gerrymandering that the two parties are engaged in to give their parties political advantages. And this is overall hurting our founders' vision of what they envisioned our Congress to be, an exact portrait of the people. And the first area I want to start in is the size of the House of Representatives. And this is extremely important because the size of the House of Representatives is extremely important if we want to make it an exact portrait of the people, because right now the House of Representatives caps at 435 members. But before I begin, the method that Congress approved to be used for House apportionment is called the Hamilton method. That was approved by Congress in 1791, but was vetoed by President Washington. It was ultimately later adopted in the year of 1852 and used through 1911. And to go through the specifics of how this method works, it goes into at least four steps. Number one, determine how many people each representative should represent. You do this by dividing the total population of all the states by the total number of representatives. This answer is called the standard divisor or divisor. Number two, you divide each state's population by the divisor to determine how many representatives it should have. Record this answer to several decimal places. This answer is called the quota. Since we can only allocate the whole representative, Hamilton resolves the whole number problem as follows with number three. Cut all of the decimal parts of all the quotas, but don't forget what the decimals were. These are called the lower quotas. Then we can add the lower quotas. Then this sum will always be less than or equal to the total number of representatives. And number four, assuming that the total number from step 3 was less than the total number of representatives, assign the remaining representatives, one each day, to the states whose decimal parts of the quota were largest until the desired total is reached. And but don't forget, under this method, under the Hamilton method, you have to make sure that each state ends up with at least one representative, which is ultimately stated on the U.S. Constitution, where every state is guaranteed at least one representative. And so, if you want to know more about this video about the Hamilton method, here's a video from Mattis4U, who gave an excellent description of how the entire Hamilton method works. So here's the video, and I'll be right back.
We want to find the divisor or standard divisor. So we take the sum of the population from all the states, which is 189,000, and divide by the total seats in Congress, which is 30. Notice how this gives us a divisor of 6,300. And now to find the quotas, we take each state population and divide by 6,300. So for state A, the quota would be 27,500 divided by 6,300. If we round to 4 decimal places, the quota for state A would be approximately 4.3651. For state B, we would have 38,300 divided by 6,300. So the quota for state B would be approximately 6.0794, and so on. To save some time, we won't show all this division. So here are our quotas to 4 decimal places. And now for the initial apportionment or initial assignment of the seats in Congress, we remove the decimal parts of the quota, which means state A would receive 4, state B would receive 6, state C would receive 7, and state D would receive 12. But notice how the sum here is 29, and we have a total of 30 seats. We now assign the remaining seat to the state whose quota has the largest decimal part. Notice state A has the largest decimal part at 0.3651, and therefore state A receives one more seat. Which means for the final apportionment, state A receives 5 seats, state B receives 6, state C receives 7, and state D receives 12. Notice here the total is 30. We've used all the seats in Congress.
So as you may know, now you know how the Hamilton method works. It's used to actually determine how many representatives each state should receive overall, and it actually makes sense to a lot of people. But there's several problems with this method that is subject to several paradoxes that arise using this method. Number one, the number one paradox is the Alabama paradox. This refers to any apportionment situation where increasing the total number of items would decrease one of the shares. Example, after 1888, the Census C.W. Seaton, who was the chief clerk of the U.S. Census Bureau, computed apportionments for all U.S. house sizes between 275 and 350. It was discovered that Alabama would get 8 seats with a house size of 299, but only 7 with a house size of 300. And number two, the population paradox is a counterintuitive result of some procedures for apportionment. When two states have populations increasing at different rates, a small state with rapid growth can lose a legislative seat to a bigger state with slower growth. It only arises because of rounding in the procedure for dividing the seats. And these are overall some of the two paradoxes that arises with the Hamilton method. As well, the last major paradox or problem that arises with this method is the new states paradox, which is pretty much if a new state is added as well as a proportional number of new seats, it seems logical that the number of seats of existing states would not change. But this is not always the case, because adding a new state with its fair share of seats can affect the numbers of seats apportioned to other states. When a state gains or loses a seat in this situation, this is called the new states paradox. Example, this was discovered in 1907 when Oklahoma became a state. The House of Representatives had 386 seats. Comparing Oklahoma's population to other states, it was clear that they should have 5 seats. As a result, the House increased its members to 391 seats as an intent to leave the number of seats unchanged for other states. But thanks to the new state paradox, when the 391 seats were apportioned, Maine gained a seat and New York lost a seat. This is an example of the new states paradox, where when a new state is added to the U.S. House of Representatives, one state another state actually gains a seat, and another state loses a seat. Where in this case, New York actually lost 1 seat. Maine actually gained 1 seat as well. New York actually went from 38 seats down to 37 seats, and Maine went from 3 seats to actually 4 seats. But overall, the Hamilton method has been used in determining how much representation each state should receive. It was used in 1852 all the way up to through 1911, and since then, the House of Representatives has always grew in size. It actually originally in 1789, it actually originally was at 59 members, and then and through the years, it grew from 67, 106, 213, 332 seats, and now remains at 435 seats. This is because when a battle in 1911, when a battle between the rural and urban factions, in which a portion through because of the following of the 1920 census, in which apportionment calculation caused many rural states to lose representation and urban states in in gaining representation. As a result of this battle between the rural and urban factions of this apportionment, the House actually failed to reapportion in the 1920 census. This is one of the reasons, following the 1920 census, why the House passed the Permanent Apportionment Act in the year of 1929 that fixed the House at 435 members. And since then, the House never grew at all. It has always remained at 435 members after the Permanent Apportionment Act was passed in the year 1929. And overall, my whole solution to this is get rid of the Permanent Apportionment Act, and let the House grow so as to expand bigger in size so it can still better reflect the will of the people, and making sure it's all making sure the House size is making sure it provides a better, it actually reflects the overall population, because as the population grows, so too does the House of Representatives. And there's a couple of methods that we can use to actually grow the House of Representatives. One is called the Wyoming rule. It's actually, with this method, it takes the population of all the 50 states and divides it by the population of the small state, being Wyoming. This would serve as the number of congressional districts to be apportioned. This method prioritizes fairness between districts, and population of the smallest states will also be the average population of congressional districts. The pro to the Wyoming rule is the ideal of equity seems very reasonable, but the only downside is it doesn't track the overall population, nor does it protect the possibility of the seats. If if we use the Wyoming rule, and based on the 2010 census, the number of representatives would actually increase from 109 from 435 to 544 seats, with 40 states receiving at least one additional representative. Applying the same rule to the 2021 redistricting would result in 577 seats, with 43 states seeing an average of an increase compared to a house size of 435. And this is what one of the methods we can use, which is the Wyoming rule. But as well, another method that we can use is called the cube root rule. This would instead have the national legislator always be the cube root of the total population of the nation. In this case, the House would be the cube root of the U.S. apportionment population minus 100. This is to account for the United States senators. Um, Overall, political scientists with this method have found that national legislators often approximate the cube root of their populations with CRR methods. With the cube root method, it would prioritize the responsiveness to population changes, because as the population grows, so does the size of Congress. That's one of the benefits with the cube root method. For example, applying the cube root method following the 2010 census would apportion 576 seats to the states, with 43 states receiving at least one additional representative. It's the same thing in 2020. In the 2020 census, 592 seats would be apportioned out would be apportioned to the 45 states, would be apportioned to all the other states, with 45 states receiving additional seats, whatever method we use. But overall, whatever method we use, the largest share of additional seats would go to the big states like California, Texas, and New York, while almost every other state would see some increase in its number of representatives. But at the end of the day, they would still, like, those other states, they would see some increases, but the largest shares would go to the big states like California, New York, and Texas. Um, the pro with the cube root rule, it provides a better fit between the population and the size of the house. But the only thing it lacks is the intuitive value of matching the size of the districts to that of the smallest states. But overall, both methods have their strengths and weaknesses, but they would still both produce much more of equal voting power across state lines and a bigger house, and they would both result in a bigger house that will better reflect the will of the people, that will create a government that will ultimately reimagine the United States House of Representatives. But despite expanding the United States House of Representatives, this comes a major problem. When we add more members, it's going to cause a problem with districting and redistricting that could lead to lopsided districts that will favor one party, where one district can favor the Democrat Party, where another district can favor the Republican parties. And this is overall called gerrymandering, that manipulates the boundaries of an electoral constituency so as to favor one party. It was named after Elbridge Gerry, which was the former governor of Massachusetts. It served 1810 through 1812, that approved a redistricting plan for the state senate that gave the political advantage to the Republican Party. And part of this is that one person actually, where the term gerrymander comes from, the Gerry came from the Elbridge Gerry, the former governor of Massachusetts, and where the mandering part came from, where one person observed one of the manipulated district boundaries that looked like a salamander, which ultimately coined the term gerrymandering. And examples where this gerrymander has been used, the Democrats have used gerrymandering in the state of Maryland. They also use it in the state of Illinois as well, and even Republicans also gerrymander in the state of North Carolina and even the state of Wisconsin to give, and they use these type of things to give their parties partisan advantages so they can win elections easily. And I would say just a form of cheating. And that's one of the problems with expanding the House of Representatives. This is a problem that's going to arise, but there's solutions to these problems. One of those solutions is single transferable voting, which will adopt multi-member districts where more than one candidate wins in a district. The districts are much more larger. FairVote is for this. The FairVote organization is actually for this. It's called the Fair Representation Act, where nonpartisan commissions actually redraw the districts where they're a lot more larger, that elect more than one person. But overall, I'm not for this. I'm not for this at all, simply because I watched CGP Gray's video on this, and the minimum number of seats you want to use under multi-member district or single transferable voting is usually around 6 to 5 seats, which is pretty much the minimum. You don't want to do 3 seats, that's usually gerrymanderable, and 9 seats is like pretty much the maximum. And I think, and you don't really want to do 9 seats, because one thing I learned under this system is that if you have 9 seats in one district, that can result in 100 candidates or 90 candidates actually running in that district for those 9 seats, and that can actually a lot. That would actually be a lot of work for the voter to rank like over 90 or 100 candidates, and it might discourage people from voting. But I actually found an overall better system to this proposal. It's called mixed member proportional. Well, but before I begin, here's a video that better explains mixed member proportional.
Mixed member proportional is the system we use in Aotearoa to choose the people and parties who represent us in Parliament. Under MMP, You get 2 votes every general election. Let's have a look at how they work. Your first vote is for the political party you support. This is called the party vote. The more votes a party gets, the more seats they will have in Parliament. If 40% of us vote for the Cherry Party, it will get around 40% of all the seats in Parliament. If 10% of us vote for the Peer Party, it will get about 10% of the seats. To get any seats in Parliament, a party must win at least 5% of the party vote, or win an electorate seat. That's where your second vote comes in. Your second vote is to choose a Member of Parliament to represent the area you live in. This is your electorate vote. The candidate who gets the most votes in your electorate will become your local MP. So, if the Banana Party wins 4% of the party vote, but no electorate seats, they have no members in Parliament.
Oh.
But if they win 4% of the party vote and also win an electorate seat, then they are entitled to 4% of all the seats in Parliament. Woohoo! This 4% would be made up of their one electorate MP, with the rest being list MPs from their party list. Because MMP is a proportional system, there can be a range of big and small parties in Parliament. Every candidate who wins an electorate gets a seat in Parliament. The remaining seats are filled from party lists according to their share of the party vote. Under MMP, parties might not have a large enough share of the votes to govern alone, so it's common to get support from other parties to form a government. The political party or group of parties with more than half the seats becomes the government. If you would like to find out more about New Zealand's political
And as you may know from the video, it's a hybrid between single-seat constituencies and for a political party. But the main difference with this system, but the main difference under my system is that instead of your electric vote being being like single member plurality or first past the post voting, where you just vote for one candidate. And that would actually be, under this system, your party vote would be your number 2 vote, and your first vote would be your constituency vote, your electric vote. So as you see in this image, here's what a ballot would look like under mixed member proportional for the U.S. House. As you see, under this system, on the left side of the ballot, this will be your first vote. This is your electric vote, where instead of voting for one candidate in your first vote, you get to rank the candidates in our preference. As I showed here, my ranking would be called. This is actually California. This is actually my district where I live in, California's 49th district. And under my first vote, I get to rank the candidates in our preference. I rank my first. I rank my You rank your number 1 candidate, your favorite candidate, as your number 1 vote. This will be your first vote, and you rank your second favorite choice as your number 2 vote. You rank the other candidate as your number 3 vote. That will be your third choice, and your least favorite choice will be at the bottom of your ranking. Where under my first vote, who I ranked as number 1, is called the Mayo, and my second vote would have been Brian Marriott. My third choice would have been Diane Harkey, and my fourth choice would be Kevin Kinsinger, which was the independent candidate. My fifth choice would be Doug Applegate. Antonio Vigoroso would have been my sixth choice, and my least favorite choice would have been Mike Levin. And under the first vote, a candidate would have to get 50% or more of the total votes to be elected as your local representative, meaning only one person wins that district, which is just a little bit different from what the video explained. But under the second vote, as what the video ultimately explained, is that under a second vote, you vote for a political party. And as you see under my ballot example, I placed an X besides the California Reform Party, and the more votes under the second vote, under the party vote, would determine how many votes each party should get. Would determine how many seats each party, how many remaining seats each party should get based on the number of votes they received in the second vote, in the second proportional vote. But in order for a party to get a seat under the system, like what the video is saying, you have to get 5% of the party-wide. You have to get 5% of the party vote under your second vote, or win an electric seat. So if the Democrats get around, like, let's say 40%, 40% of the party vote, then they will get 40% of all the seats in the House of Representatives. If the Republicans get 30% of the party vote in the second vote, they would get 30% of all the seats in the House of Representatives. And if the Libertarians get 10% of the party vote in the second vote, they will get 10% of the seats. If the California Reform Party gets 5% of the seats, which is the 5% threshold, they will get 5% of the party vote. But if the Greens only get 4% of the party vote but no electric seat, then they have no members in the House of Representatives. But if they win one electric seat and 4% of the party vote, then they will be entitled to 4% of all the seats in the House of Representatives. This 4% is made up of, like what the video explained, is made up of the one electric representative that was one electorate of the representative, and the others members will be based on will be based on their order of the party on the party of the party's list. Will get off the list of their party's list. But overall, under NMP, this would actually it would actually completely forever kill the gerrymandering, where half the seats will be made up of directly elected members, and the other half is made up of list members, where it's all members based off of the party's list. And overall, this will also overall prevent minority rule, and this will ultimately allow for political diversity. And overall, I think this is a better system. It's a lot more simple, and I think this would keep turnout still very high, because I'm all for voter turnout, making sure turnout has to be. I'm trying. Voter turnout has to be at 100%. I think turnout. I think it's important for all Americans just to turn out in every election, so you can, because that's the one area we can express ourselves through civic engagement. But overall, and even with this allowing political diversity thing, if no party has a majority in the House of Representatives, it would help bring political parties together. Because if no party has a majority in the House, the bigger parties are going to have to work across the aisle and work with smaller parties and another big party to actually form a government. They're going to have to make compromises to be able to get that party to join in their coalition to form a governing coalition. And I think it will bring some unity and a lot more fun, and make Congress a lot more functional again. That will ultimately reimagine the United States House of Representatives for decades to come. And the quick last thing is, when it comes to every 10-year census, when it comes to like redrawing the district lines, nonpartisan commissions that are run by people who cannot and have no allegiance to any political party would only be allowed to redraw the district lines when it comes to every census every 10 years. But overall, let me hear where you guys stand on this issue. Do you agree with me that we should expand the United States House of Representatives? And do you agree that we should use mixed member proportional instead? But don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, guys, this is the Young Centrist, and I am out.